Hello, everyone. And it's a new month, and we're back with a new episode of Trust Talks. Trust Talks is brought to you by Renergetics Consulting, where we transform people, transform business. If you'd like to know more about us, go on to www.renergetics.com. I'm your host, Aishwarya Subramanian, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 3 of Trust Talks. Trust Talks is a series focused on trust, where the intent of the show is to highlight the importance and impact of trust in leaders, teams, organizations, and community. But before we get started, I'd love to hear from you guys. How are you doing on this beautiful Saturday evening or morning? Tell us, where are you joining from? So to everyone who's joining us today, if you're watching the live or later on the replay, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. We will be answering them at the end of our show. Hello, Manish Bayani. Thank you for joining us. So a lot of us are probably home at this time. It's a Saturday evening or morning for you guys. I'm so glad that you guys have tuned in to this episode 3. Hi, Govardhan from Udaipur. Hi, Sri Harish from Hyderabad. Hi, Harish from Mumbai. Hello, Ravi from Hyderabad. Hi, Natarajan. Hi, Anupriya. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm loving the support and enthusiasm you guys have shown us in the episodes before and today. So please keep those comments coming in. And should you have any questions, or if you have questions for our speakers today, feel free to comment in the section in your LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube comments. All right. So in our episode today, we will be exploring how trust drives diversity and inclusion. Joining me today, we have our co-founders. We have Jessica Sarjan. Jessica Sarjan is the co-founder of Renergetics Consulting, with offices in India, Singapore, and Qatar. She's partnered with Reina, a trust building consultancy. She's also the founding member of the John Maxwell team. She's an OD consultant, professional speaker, psychotherapist, an EIT consultant, and she's also a RENA certified master trust building practitioner. Hi, Jessica. Welcome.
Thank you, Aishwarya.
So we also have Subramanian Narayan, who will be joining us today. Subramanian is the co-founder of Renergetics Consulting, partner with Reina, a trust building consultancy, the founding member of John Maxwell team. He's also an OD consultant, professional speaker, and an executive coach. He's also a Reina certified master trust building practitioner. Hi, Subramanian.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
So, to all our audience members, today in our episode, we have a very special guest joining us. Please welcome Lekha Shishta. Lekha Shishta is the global talent strategist, consultant, and advisor in the areas of leadership, talent and people success, and business strategy. She has over 4 decades of rich global corporate experience across several industries, and she's also served as a global strategic consultant with Accor Group in Dubai. She's also been awarded the Indira Gandhi Priyadarshini Award, the Asia Pacific HR Women Super Achiever of the Year, the most influential HR leader in India, and in 2009, she was awarded the Visionary Women Leader by the reputed Business APEC magazine, which was published out of Singapore. So please welcome Lekha Shishta.
Thank you so much, Aishwarya, for that wonderful introduction. And so glad to be here, Subbu and Jessica.
Thank you, Lekha. It's wonderful having you with us in episode 3 of Trust Talks. I shall now in and Jessica, and I'm looking forward to an engaging and exciting discussion. Subramanian and Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Aishwarya.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we get to asking the questions, Lekha, I must say that, you have inspired us in so many ways, of course, your rich life experiences and all that you've achieved. But I think the personal transformation that you went, I was like mind blown when you shared that you've lost 40 kilos in this 1 year of pandemic and how that has transformed you completely inside out. Kudos to you for that.
Absolutely, Jessica. I mean, I don't know. I think the pandemic has worked well for me and it's helped me in so many ways. And more than anything, I think I've generated a lot of self-confidence in myself, finally, and got rid of a lot of pain. So it's been a complete healing process inside and outside. So I'm really happy about that. Yeah.
Wonderful. So if you're ready, we are ready to get started with the questions for you. Okay. So Lekha, trust, we know, is at the core of human relationships. Okay. And I'm sure with your rich life experience, with over 4 decades of your career and in your personal life, you must have had some experiences where this trust got tested. So can you share with us 2 such instances and the impact it had on you and your career?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful question to start off. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of, going back into my childhood and look at what happened with me in school and college, right? So in school, I was quite a nerd. I was doing well in school. People used to come to me basically for my notes and things like that. But when I went into college, it wasn't anymore that factor, right? Because you can specialize in economics. Others are specializing in maybe science or psychology or math or whatever. So they don't care if you're a topper somewhere else. And I found suddenly that I was getting ostracized for probably the first time in my life. And that kind of hurt. And so I kind of retreated more and more into myself. But in at the end of year 1, when I was about to give up and say, okay, this is fine, that I'm just not going to be able to do anything more with it. I just have to take it the way it is. And I almost told my dad, I'm coming home, And my dad was a brigadier in the army, and he says, nothing doing. There's no way in which you're coming home. You are going to fight out this battle and stay here and things like that. But I then went across to this teacher of mine, a language teacher, and she was such a transformation for me because what she did was she actually told me, you got to go out there and, be yourself, and you've got to explore other dimensions which you probably have never seen before. So I said, okay, what would those be? So she said, okay, do some elocution. And I stood out there and, completely hands like this and said, okay, this is something that I need to do. And I just froze on stage. And then she came back to me and she told me, okay, why don't you just think of, nobody around you, just look above their heads. And that was a huge turning point for me. And I realized that is because she had the trust in me more than what I had ever thought myself to have, right? And she built me. So that is one where I believe that it was that trust that actually built me. Since you asked me for 2, I'll probably give you 3 actually. So the second one is where in my first ever job after I graduated from management, I went into this company and I had made this manpower manual, manpower planning manual. And I gave it up to my manager. And my manager said, no, there's a lot more that needs to be done about it. I said, all right, if there's something more that needs to be done about it, let me work on it. But then I found that just the next week, that manual was taken by my manager and showcased as theirs without a word changed, right? And that kind of broke my trust. I mean, I said, this is not possible. How can this happen? I mean, but when that manager and I, both of us know that it's something that I've done, it's not possible for somebody else to take it and acknowledge it as theirs. So that was one where I think the trust was broken completely. And then I started, then finding ways to be able to secure myself in more ways, a little bit of suspicion of everyone around me. And I think not a very happy time, especially those first few years. The time that a manager actually built me up was, again, quite recently. I think it was about in 2004. And I kind of branched back into corporate after being on my own for some time. And there was this manager of mine, who's also my mentor in many ways at Sum Total Systems, and who kind of persuaded me to get back into HR, which had changed a lot from the way in which I had known HR to be earlier. And I had been doing a lot of strategy and marketing and things like that. And he said, no, why don't you come in and lead Sum Total Systems, And I started off first as performance management, then into performance development, then I went into HR, and then I went into talent management, and I grew. And I realized that this was a person who actually trusted me to do whatever I felt was right. And the way he gave me that open space, he gave me a very long rope, and it allowed me to kind of flower. So we did a lot of great things, absolutely fabulous things. I had a great team, of course, because I had the ideation, but they were the people who implemented it, and they implemented it to us getting into the person's first quadrant as well. So we were really happy and thrilled. That was where actually all the awards also started, the recognition started. And it was all because of this one person who believed in me and trusted me to be able to do the best I could. So, so I had one episode in careers where it was broken, but then another one that kind of rejuvenated me and brought back that trust in myself. So yes, trust is an extremely important factor, I think, not only for your self-confidence, but your own performance also works a great deal because of that.
Lovely, Lekha. In fact, each of your story had a message. The first story where you were just budding and ready to bloom, it was a story of where your own confidence and trust in yourself had not yet kicked in. And I'm reminded of Les Brown's words, which says, borrow somebody else's faith in you till your own kicks in. And that's what that professor did for you. And here you are. So, and I think the behavior he exhibited where he empowered you, where he showed that he believed in you, that made the difference for you. And your second story was a classic example of what happens when, when trust is broken, when there's betrayal, how sapping it can be. And then the suspicion and how wary you become. So it was so, your story was literally showing us these behaviors and the impact it can have. And of course, the last story which you shared, the expanding energy of trust and what it can do, like the bud, how it could completely bloom, and where you are today because of that mentor who believed in you and empowered you. Beautiful sharing, Lekha. Thank you. So are you ready for the next question?
Absolutely. Anytime you are.
Okay. So, Lekha, you have received several awards and accolades from multiple bodies and multiple associations. In fact, you were featured in the cover of the renowned international magazine, the Business APAC magazine of 2019 edition. And I remember during one of our earlier conversations, you shared about this imposter syndrome. Do you mind sharing a little more about what that experience was and then how you got over it?
Yeah, I think that's a very real problem that, we have. And this is something that was actually initially first thought of by, I think, Imes and Clance back in the 1950s. And then a very famous book as recently as, I think, 2011 by Dr. Valerie Young on the imposter syndrome. But when I got it and when it struck me was, I think, around the time that I had got that Indira Gandhi Priyadarshini Award, and I was, in Delhi receiving the award. And I kept saying that I feel like such a fake. I hope nobody is really going to be seeing me here, and I'm going to be unmasked. There is going to be somebody who's definitely going to know that I don't deserve to be here. And it kind of shook me to the core because I know that I had been achieving a lot, But the fact that I was suspicious of myself and wary of people around me, that you begin to say, oh, this is just luck. And, you pass it off by saying, this is, it just happened. It's not something that I really worked for. I don't know how I got it. And you kind of underplay your competence. You underplay your achievements in a lot of ways. And I think that is the ground reality that happens. So while Dr. Valerie Young actually had stated that this is something that happens to most women, I disagree, because I've seen it happening to many men as well, and especially academia. In fact, I believe I also teach on weekends, and I find that, especially in the classroom, I find so many professors do not acknowledge that they do not know, because they believe it's going to kind of shake their own roots, right? People are not going to be able to believe in them. They're not going to be able to hold that position of respect in the eyes of the students. And so it happens everywhere. So it's not just men or women or academia. I think everybody. And I think the thing to do, and this is where, I then spoke to my mentor and I said, I don't understand why am I feeling like this. And I've had mentors all through, different kinds of mentors at different levels, like I think most of us have. So I spoke to him and I said, I cannot understand why I feel so shaky. And he said, you've got to talk to yourself and you actually have to re-energize yourself. So I like the word of your company, Renergetics, So you really need to re-energize yourself by talking to yourself about the way in which you have achieved things. So even if nobody else does, you have to believe in it yourself. So I think that was that was how I started. And then I started speaking to others about it. And I, in fact, took a very close friend of mine along for that ceremony, so that, I would see in her eyes whether I really deserved it or not. But there were a lot of those affirmations that I was looking for at that time. But it was a big learning, a very big learning for me, that the imposter syndrome is something that we truly need to guard against. And while it's real, it doesn't need to become us. We can always get over it. But it's not that it never happens, okay? Even today, it could happen. It could happen to me in a new audience, or, talking of something which I'm not very familiar with, for example, or where I'm a little shaky, like just 2 days back, I had done a session for somebody else where I was also talking about some unhappy incidents in my life. And I found that, again, you have that, okay, people are going to find out that this is not me. And is that really going to be shaking my level as a professional now today, and things like that. So I think it's something that's very real and requires a lot of counseling, a lot of self-talk. And I hope people who are listening to this realize that it is real for them. And therefore, they need to find ways to get over it. And there are lots of ways to be able to do that. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a very important part of the trust, because what happens with that is also that one of the first reasons that comes up is, I think, when you don't have the trust in yourself and in your own competence, and you believe that it's something that has only been probably seen by a very small section of people, and you don't know whether others do know it, whether they recognize you for the worth that you bring or not. And therefore, I think engendering that trust again through others who are in your close circle is a very essential part of working out of that imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, Lekha, that many a times you kind of go into self-reflection, and these self-reflections in a way are for us to get better, get to the next level, ask ourselves if we are giving our best and if we are equipped enough, and to some degree I think that makes sense. I think what we need to also be careful is we do not go doubting ourselves to an extreme degree as well. But that's true. I think in my career, there have been many stages and points where you almost get to a point and ask yourself, how well prepared are you? And do you really walk the talk when certain situations pops up in front of you? And thank you for that. That's really being as transparent as one can be. Go ahead. You want to make a comment, Jesse?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, how important it is to be true to ourselves, because trust begins with us, right? And when we are true to ourselves, when we are congruent, and we are fine being vulnerable, just like you are here on the show, just being yourself, it kind of connects much more with people. And I think that is where trust starts. Like, trust begins with us, and by we being real, I think we help others be real too.
So
Thank
true.
you. Thank you.
So
And you
true.
brought that up. So thank you for, allowing me to speak on that bit. Thank you.
I think leaders, when they show that they are not perfect, and Lekha, you made that point, although you did not use the same words, but if essentially we are basically, when we show that we are not perfect, we are basically giving a chance to become vulnerable, and then you connect with the team. The team connects with you because they feel you're real. So it's a great point there. And our topic today has been around trust, diversity, and inclusion. And it's interesting, when I was thinking about this particular episode 3, and with you, and with your 4 decades of journey that you have had, I've always heard diversity and inclusion being said almost like a single word. Now, we all know it's diversity and inclusion, but it always gets partnered with each other, meaning whenever you say diversity, you say inclusion. So you've kind of gone, and even there's an acronym which says D&I. Now, but if you pause a little bit, you reflect on these two words and ask yourself as to, are they the same even though they are partnered together, then you start quickly realizing that they obviously are not the same. And diversity looks at the point of view of who. So when you're bringing in a new employee, new talent into the organization, you're very meticulous. You want to make sure that you want to increase diversity in the organization because you believe in diversity and the values that come off that. Now, so diversity focuses on the who, and then you have inclusion, where it talks about, or the perspective is how. And when I say how, you're basically saying, how are you going to make these diverse people feel included? So, in my 30 years of experience, Lekha, I have seen corporates making more effort on the diversity aspect of it. And in many ways, corporates have also enjoyed the number that comes off the diversity. They could say they have X number of different genders. They could say they have X numbers of percentages of people with different backgrounds, culture, country. But I haven't heard people putting in as much effort, or I haven't heard as much people talking about inclusion. Now, I don't know if it's just me, and I wanted to catch your perspective and your experiences. Whether how's that been with you? Is it so that corporate focus on diversity more because it's easier, and is it easier, and is inclusion difficult? So there's a couple of perspectives there, and I would like to hear your perspectives on that.
Thank you. I think it's a very, very important point, and probably the base for today's session, because we were talking of gender diversity. But I'd like to also break it up into 2 or 3 other diversities as we talk. You're very right that very many corporates look at the number game. So it is 20% of women, or 5% of people with physical disabilities, and so on. I think somewhere along the way, they forget to recognize empathetically the actual problems that that group of people are bringing into the organization. So again, let me take a step back and look at the time when I was, let's say, in doing my my MBA, my management from the IIM Bangalore. We were very few girls in my class. Most of us were people who were from various backgrounds, a lot of engineers, in fact, and I was a art student, so to say, economics student, going there very young, directly out of college, and one of the few women. But I found that at that time, back in 1980, and I know this is going to make me sound like a dinosaur, which I am, but anyway. So, at that time when we were in the institute, I found that I really did not face the discrimination of being a woman, in the sense that we were very protected. Everyone around us gave us a chance. We were always, we always had things to do, involved in many of the case studies and the activities. So it was a very warm and enveloping group. But when you walk into industry and you find that that is not so, right? I mean, so in my first job, we were very few women again. And we had, the same kind of problems that you see in many of these movies that there are these days about whether it's Gunjan and things like that. It is that, there are probably on the factory floor, there are no washrooms for women right there. You need to go and use the one for the class 4. So again, you don't feel that people are actually recognizing that there is a difference. So while to an extent, and I'm talking back in the 1980s, you did feel that that's all right. Okay, people don't recognize you to be different, and it's probably nice to be one of the boys at that time. But there are physical problems. There are issues that one has. And do we really think about it when we are finally getting people in? So whether it's women or it is like, let's say that we also look, for instance, these days when you have these global companies, you are looking at people who are going to be more cosmopolitan. So whether they are from the north or the south of India or outside India or wherever, you're getting people in with different nationalities, backgrounds, rural and the urban. But then you have these cliques that are being formed in companies. And if HR or the talent team does not take into account that the cliques can be people who are actually creating barriers for collaborative working, for trusting, and they start looking at, whatever, maybe they found it easier to speak in Telugu or in Tamil or whatever. You can't do that in a business environment where people need to feel included. So I believe that, the point that you make is so true. I also was interviewing Aviva recently, Aviva Wittenberg Cox, and she spoke of something which is known as the gender jaws, where she said that, it's very strange that right in the beginning, you might have equal number of women who have joined the company. And while we call it like the leaking pipeline, that by the time people reach the, let's say, the middle level, you start having women who are dropping off. But she also speaks of the fact that how is it that suddenly the proportion of men in senior decision-making levels in a company which says that they have 28% of women, how is it the proportion of men is so much more at the senior levels? And therefore, in that boardroom or in the policy-making forum, where are the women being represented? Are they being spoken of? Do people even understand? Like, for instance, one very common thing is, I find sometimes men look down and say, why is it that the women always have to clique together? Why do they have to have lunch at the same table? Why can't they mix with us? But it isn't that. It's just that, if you don't understand me, then I prefer to be with people who understand me. So why do you not engender that feeling of rapport? Because women love rapport. And men, of course, love reporting. And present company excluded, I'm sure. But it is a fact that, there is a complete different dimension to gender. And while you're doing that, I think we need to also look at the fact that you might have 6 months maternity leave, etc. But then don't make it difficult for the woman to come back in. You have to be able to keep her included throughout all that time that she's on maternity leave. Keep her updated. Get her to know what's happening around. Like, don't make it out to be that, oh, now we have to get her back because it's part of, because it's mandated. That's not the way to be. Otherwise, you are actually excluding 50% of the talent. And the other thing also to look at is, why is it that women automatically get into more support roles than actual technical business roles? So even in the boardroom, if you look at it, and that's one of the organizations that I'm also, connected with, we are trying to get more and more women into the boardroom. But why is it that women are taken more as HR, more as finance? Why not the engineers? Why not the business processing people? So we need to be able to ensure that more and more women grow into those positions, which they can do and do extremely well. I was just reading recently that, even in Telangana, these women operators have been now taken even on the streets to climb up poles for electricity. And for telecom. So if they can do it there, why is it so difficult for companies to be able to look at it? I'm going to talk of another bit of diversity here and look at the, people with who are physically challenged or with special abilities, for instance. We had taken a couple of people in one of the companies just before I joined. We had them included in our company. Very fabulous workers, great sharp minds. But two of them were, they needed to be able to be on crutches. They couldn't work with a wheelchair very easily, especially in our confined places, and their arms weren't strong enough for that either. So they were with crutches because they were using their shoulders and their armpits more to move. And then I found that they actually had other problems. And the problem was, how do they even go to use the washroom? Because the washroom was a step higher. How do they get into that place? How do they reach up to even bolt the door or to open the door? So there were small things like this. How do they reach behind for the sanitary, they flush? It's difficult. So people don't think of that. And I think that that's extremely important. You need to be able to put yourself in the shoes of those people and then create inclusive practices. Simple thing. When we had our fire drill, who thought of taking these two people down 13 floors? And how would they escape if there was a fire? So, then I had to create this group of people who would then work with the fireman's hang and carry them physically down those steps. And it's not easy. But we don't even imagine the kind of problems that they could have. And that is why actually I believe that, even things like now with the pandemic, which has allowed so many people to work from home, I think there are a lot of sections of people who are diverse and who probably had missed the chance of really being in corporate. And they've come back because of the flexibility, being able to work from home, whether they're mothers or taking care of older people, the aged care, or it could be people who are physically disabled, for instance, with special abilities, who are now able to sit in the comfort of their homes where things are already arranged for them and allow them to then be as productive and feel valued as possible. But what happens when we take them back? Are we ready for it? So my point to most of the HR people and to organizations is don't just make it a word of mouth, right? Feel it and really do what you can to keep people feeling included in everything, participate in everything. So think about, okay, what is it that, a person from North, you have, for instance, even things like in the cafeteria, and you have a lot of, let's say, Westerners who are in your company, right? I mean, who are coming from the US or from UK, and they are there. And then you have these very spicy sambar every day for lunch. Now, how are those people going to be sitting and eating with you? Do we think about it? So that's what I'm saying. I said, we need to be able to have the practices to also make people feel included, not just have it a number game. And the other thing I also wanted to bring out is, I'm not saying just have diversity for the sake of diversity. Today, it's not just D and I, it's DEI, where we're talking of also the equity. So we say, do with people the way in which they deserve to be dealt with, right? So if a person is extremely productive, whether it's a man or a woman or whatever, you need to be able to create the right kind of forum for them to be able to be rewarded, be recognized, be awarded, and so on. I think it's very, very essential. So the specially abled, blind, I had a couple of people who were blind in another company that, I was an advisor to. And I said that we need to be able to think this through. It's not just about being a company which is allowing people to come in, but are you ready for it? And you have to make yourself ready for it. Otherwise, you're losing out on a large group of people who are extremely talented. So one needs to definitely make sure that you bring in that inclusivity. Don't just look at it as diversity and don't just think of it as a number game. It's just something to be ticked off. It has to be something that is felt and owned by everybody in the company.
That's a well said, Lekha. And I was reflecting as you were responding to that question, and I was asking myself, in my 3 decades of corporate life, what were the instances and what were my behaviors? And it's interesting what pops up when I was listening to you. Now, it's easy for leaders, and you rightly said, it's easy for leaders to say X% is our diversity number, X% is the specially able number. But the real test, and you again picked it up well and said, it's about feeling. The question here is when you bring in specially abled, and specially abled are still way different, and which means you need to be educated as a leader as to what his or her needs are for that person to be feeling included. So when a person joins in into corporate, how much thought goes into finding out whether that person is feeling, quote unquote, included? And I say that because when it comes to feeling, it's not about statistics. And again, Lekha, you made that point very clear. When it comes to feeling, it's about behavior. And I was thinking about my own instances and where people would request for a maternity leave and people would ask for special exceptions. And when we talk about special exceptions, one another point that pops up in DNI is different people are at different stages of their life. And different stages of their life demands different expectations. Their needs are different at that point in time. And the challenge to the leaders is this: they have to meet targets, but more importantly, they are dealing with people. And when it comes to dealing with people, like you rightly picked it up, feeling included is a huge thing. And it's not something you could do it with a snap of a hand. It's not something people are natural at it, because you mentioned about empathy. To understand what's the need of that person, to understand how that person is feeling, is purely driven by behaviors. And the reason why I'm highlighting behaviors also for the audience here and also in this Trust Talk platform is we keep saying, and Jessica said that in her first question as well, trust is at the core of human relationship, and we say that. But I want to remind listeners and people who will be listening later on is trust is so fundamental that if you do not show that in your behavior, if you do not show that you care for that person, if you do not sit down and listen to what that person is undergoing, forget even listening, but allow an environment where they can be vulnerable, allow an environment where they can speak their mind and say what is it that they're going through. Because I have felt many a times when I would go for some of these meetings where senior members are there, I would always have, now, a little bit of that could be my own hesitation, but at the same time, there were moments where I would think a lot could have been done. And I'm sure many of us, and including leaders and all the audience who are watching now, would have gone through at some point in time where they would have said feeling included could have been done better. So again, great point there. DNI is a great topic for all of us because it boils down to saying, are we treating everybody equitably? And you made the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So great discussions along the lines. And I see audiences coming along and making similar comments, and they seem to be excited and aligned with a lot of points that, Lekha, you shared earlier. So
it's nice to know.
Yeah, and I see many comments coming along, and we will continue to flash them. Now, when we say inclusive leaders, and I've used the term secure leaders, and I'm using a term now as inclusive leaders. When we say inclusive leaders, in my opinion, my 2 cents is they must have the courage to learn and grow, make mistakes, ask for support, and you mentioned that earlier on, being vulnerable, and admit when they don't know and don't know what they're talking about. These leaders must be willing to be publicly vulnerable, and I'm saying publicly vulnerable because you can be vulnerable selectively in a smaller audience where you're more comfortable, but publicly vulnerable is an entirely different scenario and different situation. And my question to you, Lekha, is this. In your experience, have you come across a leader who you feel, when you reflect on the 4 decades, do you see anybody that stands out who you recall as an inclusive leader? And if you recall somebody like that, what qualities made that person an inclusive leader? And also I have a added comment or a question along with that is, talking of leaders being vulnerable, do you remember any such moment in your own journey where you found yourself being vulnerable? So two
Okay.
parts to it. Where did you see an inclusive leader? What qualities were they displaying? And then your situation that stands out, where you really had to become vulnerable, and what was the impact of that?
Okay, wonderful. So let me deal with the first one. Yes, there have been a lot of inclusive leaders that I have had the good fortune to work with. And one of my mentors, like I told you earlier, he was extremely inclusive. He was a person who believed and very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. So he had no bones about saying, you know what, I'm really upset today. Something has happened at home or whatever, and I cannot come to work. It's something which is really, and he trusted us enough not, that we should not make him look small, right? So that was one. I won't name them. The other person I think also was my own mentor, who I had spoken about earlier. He was a person who believed that he didn't know enough about the game of talent management, and he expected that, yes, he could trust me enough to be able to do that. So he put himself actually in a very vulnerable position, because if I had gone wrong, then his neck would have been, on the block. And especially as that was a company that was not just growing and growing fast, but was also one that was even taking on, going up for funding. So it could have been really disastrous. But the fact that he put himself in that position, saying that I don't know enough, you want to do it, you can go ahead and do it. I give you the authority to do it, and I will take the blame if things go wrong. Right. And I think that was wonderful. And my own dad, if I look at my father, brigadier in the army, a person who was, known as Napoleon by his younger brothers and sisters, very, very strict. We were three daughters and I was the oldest, and very often I had to get the bad end of the baton from him as well. So, but then at the same time, when I went into management and, I started working, it was very obvious that he knew that he didn't know what I was doing. And he said, that's fine. You know what you're doing and you know it best. So I think that again comes from the feeling of trust and knowing that the other person is not going to misuse the trust that he has reposed in me by saying that it is something that I don't know enough about. Right. So, but then I see, the reverse happening, like I also mentioned about teachers. I've seen many leaders also who don't like stating that they don't know. And therefore, they go ahead and make the wrong decisions for the people. And they don't trust their people enough to go ahead and do it. Or they don't want to show that they trust the people enough, right, who are there in their team. And that could be extremely dangerous for the organization. So I would say that you asked me about the 2 to 3 factors that probably are, let's say, the inner competencies or traits of
Qualities.
these people can be vulnerable. And I would say that it is, first of all, is humility. I think that's extremely important. Second is the combination of restraint and not micromanaging other people. So you hold yourself back from trying to be too interfering or trying to take ownership completely about it, but while you are still accountable, right? So you don't just come out there and you're not in the forefront of things. And the third one, I think, is the feeling of empowering others. I think these are the 3 things that I would put down. So humility, restraint, and empowerment. So if I can go on to the next question, and I think here I will talk a little bit about myself and myself becoming vulnerable. So this was at a time when I was growing in my career, doing very well, but my personal life was going, very, very awry. And then I realized that if that is happening, if I am going to be in a position that, let's say my marriage is breaking up and I was, walking out with my children, and I walked out with actually nothing in the pocket, right? So it was completely zero bank balance after so many years of working. But then I needed to be able to put my children through academics and, build a home and things like that. And then I realized that I was afraid at that time that people will look at me with a feeling of, okay, so she's been a success in her career, but she made a mess of it personally. And I was wondering if that's actually going to shake my what can I say, the reputation that I have, because in India still there is so much of, well, not so much now, but I think in those days there was so much of social ostracization for women who were then going to live alone, or come out of a unhappy marriage, that I think I was very afraid that will even impact me at work. So I remember that for the first 5 or 6 years after that breakup happened and the separation happened, and before the divorce, in fact, I really wouldn't talk about it at all, and I would have these masks on wherever I am, trying to pretend that things all hunky dory and everything is fine. I was afraid to be vulnerable. But much later, I actually recognized, and over the last, let's say, 10, 12 years since then, I have realized that it actually makes sense to allow people, like Jessica had said earlier, and I think that's very real. I think people need to know that you are real with the same kind of problems that they have. Maybe not the same kind of problems, but you also have problems. And if you can say that you can get over it, then they also feel a strength of being able to get over it. Like right now, I have no qualms in talking about the fact that, yes, at one time I was 40 kgs more overweight, right? And it had affected me, my own self-esteem, plus forget about the pains, aches and pains, but my own self-esteem had undergone a beating. But then I have no qualms now in admitting that, because I feel that I have won over it. And therefore this shows that people don't need to reach that level of obesity before they can actually take their wellness in hand. Similarly, you don't have to have everything in your life always perfect. There can be something that has gone wrong, may not have been even in your locus of control, and it's fine. But if you can still make the rest of, let us say, the 300 degrees perfectly okay, what happens about the 60 degrees? That's fine, right? Everything does not have to be perfect. And I think that vulnerability finally creates a more human approach, and people find that they can come talk to me. Today, I mentor so many women who are, and I'm not just talking about weight, but I'm also talking about, I'm mentoring women to be able to strengthen themselves through personal and professional distress. And I'm able to do that because I have been through it myself, and I can share it with them. I may not be sharing it the way in which I'm sharing it with everyone right now, but yes, these are things that happen, and so I've been there, done that. I've known how to get over it, and it's fine, right? So yes, I have definitely had that vulnerability, and I've definitely felt that it could have affected my career. But today, I don't think so. I don't think that it could have really affected it the way in which I was fearful of it at that time.
Yeah. While you were talking about vulnerability, and I kind of agree on the power of vulnerability, because I say power of vulnerability because when you show your vulnerable side, obviously you start connecting with people, and that's been backed up by research as well. What's interesting for me in the responses that you were giving, and as I was thinking of my journey, what I was sensing very clearly is there were many moments where I was vulnerable, but I never showed the vulnerable side of me. And I was asking myself, why did I not show the vulnerable side? Obviously, I was scared. And you mentioned at some point in time you felt scared as well. So, with all well meaning, with all good intentions, leaders, many of us, if not all, do end up in situations where they feel afraid to share their vulnerability. And what I was thinking on the flip side was, in the last few years where we have been dealing with clients and teaching them how, using the trust behaviors, how they could be vulnerable and how magical that could be for them as leaders when they show their vulnerable side. So that was two things that was running in my mind.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to react a little bit on this as well, Subbu, if I may.
Yeah.
I think what happens as leaders is, especially when you don't have the humility and you think that it's a position of entitlement, I think you put yourself on a pedestal. And when you put yourself on that pedestal, first of all, it's difficult for people to reach you. And then you're afraid that you have developed feet of clay, and people are going to be looking at the feet of clay because that's the level that they are looking at you at, right? The rest of you is too far up. And at that point, when you feel that you're developing the feet of clay, you feel that the entire idol is going to shatter and come down. And then you wonder, how are you going to pick yourself up? And I believe that, it's time for leaders like that to step down, step off that pedestal, be at one with everyone else. And only then can true collaborative atmosphere, participative environments truly work to get talent running productively.
Yeah, and simultaneously, I get reminded of leaders that I've had who never felt an issue being vulnerable. These guys were the cool cats, I would call it. And I still clearly remember one person that I can think of. He was from Hong Kong, but was in Singapore. His name is Lawrence. And if he's on the call or if he listens to it, he will know who I'm referring to. But he had this ability or innate ability with his behavior to make everything look simple. And that's something I've always appreciated. But of course, now after 10 years of that, and having been closely learning the trust behaviors, I relate to some of the behaviors that he would do. He was open for feedback. He would not get into this pedestal of saying, I know everything. In fact, he would not even claim any of that knowledge. He would say, well, this is what
Very
I'll
open,
do.
not just to
Yeah.
feedback, also I think learning from everyone around.
Yeah, and he would say, this is what I'm going to do. If it goes wrong, but that's all I have. I'm not going to fret about it. And he would be very cool about it. And so when you come across these people, but once you start analyzing as to the behaviors behind what made them what they are, because of they were innately equipped with that. So vulnerability, the behavioral aspects of it do make a huge impact. And I think we are getting a whole lot of questions here. So let's go on to the questions. And Aishwarya, if you could give us those questions, and we could have Lekha take them, and we could all take some pieces of that.
Sure. So the first question that we have is from Priya over here. She's asking, what are some tools to build trust in a matrix organization, especially when you're working remotely in a global role, and what are some of them in a leadership position?
Okay, let me start off, but I'm sure both Subbu and Jessica will be able to answer that a lot more. I will just speak about it from what we really do today. And, when you're working remotely, not just now, but I'm also saying, before the pandemic, pre-pandemic, you're working somewhere, let us say in the UK, the rest of the elsewhere across the world. I think it's important for people to connect at people's own time zones. Like, for instance, one of the companies that I'm advising now, and it's so refreshing to find a CEO who works at Indian timings. He sits in the US, but he doesn't mind working the entire night, and the rest of the team works according to their regular timings. And I think that is something which is so refreshing. So we know that we actually are doing something for somebody who is willing to go the extra mile, right? So that's one way. The second thing is to be able to also understand that you don't need to micromanage, not just because you cannot, but you don't need to micromanage and know where are people, what are they doing today, how are they working, are they sitting online for all 10 hours? I don't think that's about trust. I think trust is about creating the deliverables and allowing people to work at their own pace and time. And that actually has increased productivity. If people can, with the kind of pandemic and the restrictions that we've had recently, you don't have housekeepers at home. You don't have your older parents staying at home. So there is no, network to even look after the children. And then you find that you have to take calls at a particular time. The children are also having to do their studies at that time. But if the manager can understand that this is something that there is a flexibility, it's a possibility that you take the call later, or there is, that sharing that happens within the family also. I think that understanding between the manager and the people is very, very, very critical to be able to build trust. So remote working has to have its basis in trust. Otherwise, my fear is that, in fact, after the pandemic is over, we are actually going to have a lower degree of loyalty in many companies if you have not already enjoyed that level of trust. And you're probably going to find that people have even, gone in for gig working instead of actually being with one company, because They just found it easier to work in different kind of dimensions. So I believe that you need to have built that bond right away. And similarly also, and I like the point that you bring up, Priya, about the matrix organization. I think it's important that if I'm on a project working with another person and then I have to come back and let's say my ACR or my performance appraisal is being done by my original manager, how am I able to ensure that this original manager also knows about how my project manager thinks about me? And I think that's where the feeling of trust again needs to be built, that both the managers need to work together and recognize that they have to have the development and the productivity of the team and the person right on the top of their mind. So whether it's the leader or a manager, anyone who's working with people, I believe trust is fundamental to productivity. But I
Well
would
said.
leave, Subbu and Jessica to also respond on that.
Well said. Jesse, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I fully agree with Lekha with her insights, and what's coming to my mind, some of the aspects she shared about micromanagement, for example. I'm reminded of the trust behaviors as per the Reina trust model, where we say again and again, it is our behaviors that build trust. So for a matrix organization that's working in a remote, in a global role, when you're in a global role and it's a matrix organization, what I feel is if we can get the entire team, the virtual team, to come together and agree on a common behavior that they practice, because behaviors like how they manage expectations, how they give and receive feedback. So though they are remotely, they come together, like there is a common thing that bonds them together and actually helps the trust grow between them. So that holds them together, even if they are physically not together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so true. And just to add to that nuance there of managing expectations, managing expectations, we all know, we all do. But the question when Jessica says manage expectations from a trust perspective, you're basically saying, are you supporting your team members adequately to the point where they are feeling safe to deliver? That's the question. We all manage expectations, but we end up saying that's your problem, or we end up behaving in a way that ends up feeling that, okay, so I need to solve it. But if you are going to make them feel secure and safe, make them be themselves, then you're going to see trust slowly coming into play, and then you will see managing expectations goes to another level. Why? Because managing expectations also includes that I could come and renegotiate my timeline because circumstances would have changed. The world is so dynamic today that what I promised in the beginning and what I'm looking at and staring at is not the same. And so it is once you say I trust, then both are valid. But if you say I don't trust, then you will say, how can I let him change his goalpost? That's because you're not trusting the person. But once you start saying I trust the person, and it works both ways, then it's a different ball game that we're getting into. So that's
Yeah,
some
and
add-ons
talking
to
of,
that.
responding to, just reacting to one point that you brought out about feeling safe and secure, I think it's important also to allow your people to feel safe enough to share with you their issues,
Yeah,
right? I mean, and
and
not feel
leaders
against them.
yeah, and leaders exemplify that, because if the leader shows that he is vulnerable, if the leader shows I am not perfect, and Nidhi had made the same comment, perfect is basically saying that we don't want to be know all person, right? Because why do you need diversity then? Why do you need a team then? So that's one thing. Colonel Ajay says vulnerability doesn't mean being resourceful. Vulnerability means you are letting people know you are not the know all person. Vulnerability means you're letting the team know that they can be themselves and feel safe and secure.
In fact, vulnerability leads to team leadership, because you are you are admitting, okay, I'm not good in something, and you're actually leveraging the strengths the team has. So that is where I think you really leverage the team leadership and take your results to another level.
Yeah, and I think vulnerability is really about showing your weakness, that you are also
Yeah,
human. You're
yeah,
not you're not you're not perfect in all
yeah,
ways. Like I said, there are certain weaknesses. There are certain way. Like it's not just that you don't know enough, but that you hurt, that you are human, that you feel. These are also things that I think it's fine to be. You are fearful, afraid. I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
important to show.
yeah.
We
So
have
there's another. Yeah, go ahead, Aishwarya.
Yeah, we have another question coming in from Nidhi. She says, while I'm hearing about hiring, can we hear about instances when an employee is diagnosed with a chronic illness? How inclusive are companies, and can amendments be made to retain staff?
Absolutely, Didi. I've personally had a case in my UK office where I had a person who was actually suffering from, an illness which which did not allow him to come into work very often. There would be days on end where he needed to be at home. But the company we made all the arrangements possible for him to continue to work from home. There was a lot of understanding about his own medical problems that he had. And he still managed to do whatever he could. I'm not saying that he was 100% productive, but I think we were very understanding of him. And we need to make that inclusive feeling. So chronic illness is again something. I don't see too much of it yet in India, but it is mandated in the UK and in the US and in many other European countries as well. I think we need to make sure that it is also something which can allow a person to feel that he can continue to work and be as productive as possible with that illness income. I don't see it
Yeah.
happening much, but I think we should. Good point, Nidhi.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lekha, you said it's mandated. And once it's mandated, it's so easy for companies to follow because it's a no-brainer. No, not even no-brainer, they have to comply. And I think the challenge here is, and Nidhi is in Singapore, and she realizes that many companies are so cost conscious that they don't even realize many a times, leaders, when they make these decisions, they don't realize how unknowingly they are exemplifying in through their behaviors by not being inclusive. If they did not accommodate the needs of this person who is chronically ill, let's say after a decade of experience or even after a few years of experience or working with them, I think comes down to values. It comes down to trust. It comes down to asking ourselves as leaders, what is it that you want to show from a value and trust perspective? And what would that mean to the company branding? What would that mean to all the talk about people being important?
And what would it mean to just increase the productivity in the team? It's automatically, I mean, the
Yeah.
minute I find that, more people are thinking for others, automatically
Yeah.
there is so much of energy, there's so much of engagement in the entire team. There's a positive culture that is built up. And I think we need to go beyond, and I hope that, we don't need to wait till it's mandated. We should start working on things more, much better right now.
Yeah, and imagine the impact it's going to have not just on the person who is chronically ill, but imagine the entire organizational teams that
Absolutely.
are there when they look at the company making exceptions and making breaking the exceptions and building something which is not in the policy. What message is going to go out to the rest of the population? Now, I'm not saying companies can do this irrespective of the cost, but at some point in time, values need to speak, and values will speak.
Right. Absolutely. It needs to become the DNA of the organization. People need to just think
Yeah.
for others.
Yeah. One of the reasons why we are running this Trust Talks platform is to let people know that trust is tangible, measurable, and can be learned, can be taught. That's been one of the reasons why we run this Trust Talk show. We want to let people know there is a far more simpler but a sustainable way to profits through trust.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a feel good. It actually does make a difference to the organization. Absolutely. Completely agree.
So,
Even
Subramanian,
from my dinosaur viewpoint.
Subramanian, Lekha, and Jessica, do we have time for one more question? Priya has a follow-up question.
Sure.
She says, how do you make this work the other way? How do you get your team to manage upwards effectively and with accountability?
Again, a very good question, Priya. And I think it works both ways, as you very correctly stated. I think the manager needs to make sure that they encourage that trust in people. Like, for instance, he needs to be able, and today I think I hear a lot of times when there is more delegation upwards than downwards. But I can't do the job, so can my manager please go ahead and take these calls? Yeah, I see that happening quite a bit. But I think you need to be able to build that feeling of trust downward as well, so that the people who are there in your team are able to believe that they can look at me with the same kind of openness or frankness. Come tell me whatever it is, and also it's not about managing me, right? It's about making sure that I can do whatever I can to help them and to help the company. So that I think that accountability has to be at all levels. It's not something which is just up down, but it has to be right across, laterally as well. So I think trust is the basic factor. You need to be able to create that feeling of cooperation, of collaboration, of removing the fear from your team below you. They should be able to feel that there's nothing wrong, that if I don't know what I'm doing as well, it's fine to come and admit that, can you please teach me, or can you put me into a course for that, or can I buddy up with somebody else? And I think they would then realize that if the company is doing so much for me, I would need to be accountable for whatever. So how does one build that? And I think it needs to work right. It's not something that is, like I said, just top down. It needs to come right across the organization. I don't know whether I've answered your question, Priya, but I'm sure Subbu and Jessica would also love to add.
Jesse, go ahead if you want to add, and I may have one comment.
I think you can go ahead, Subramanian.
I think Priya, that's a great question and a loaded question in my opinion. A lot of leaders would say they want to do that. They want to see it happening where it is working upward, as you said, where the teams manage upwards. That means they work with seniors and manage the accountability and manage that effectively. In order for that to happen, let's think about this. When would a junior talk to a senior and say, you haven't done this? When would a junior talk to a second level or a third level and say, I'm not getting what I want? When would they do that? In my 30 years, 3 decades of in corporate, I can't think of much occasions where I have been able to. Meaning, I have done it. I have done it where I've asked questions, but I have seen the uncomfortableness of my questions also with leaders. And when I say uncomfortableness, what does that mean? It is a hint to you through body language that those questions are not welcome. They did not say that. He probably did not hint at it. But you know what I do, right? I will take hints. If you're not comfortable when I ask those difficult questions, would I ask that again? I won't. Why? Because I saw you getting uncomfortable. So it's cultural, it's behavior. You have to be open and you have to give examples to your team members and say, I'm open for a two-way discussion. And that's where we talk about earlier. Jessica said, giving feedback, we do, but do we encourage receiving feedback? Because you don't wait to get a feedback. You have to ask. And when the leaders ask for a feedback regularly, in fact, after every feedback that you give, if we ask them for a feedback, then you're opening up a channel to communicate upwards. And how good that will be, because if everybody feels safe and secure, the organization results are going to skyrocket. Your organization's competitive edge today is with people. And with people, what's at the core? Trust.
Great. Absolutely fabulous questions as well. Nice to find such an interactive audience and from all across the globe. So that's wonderful.
That's true.
So thank you so much, Subramanian, Lekha, and Jessica, for answering the questions that our audience members had and helping us understand better as to how trust impacts diversity and inclusion.
Thank you.
So thank you, Lekha. Thank you so much.
Such a
Go ahead,
pleasure.
Aishwarya.
Thank you, Lekha.
Thank you.
So for all of our audience members who have attended and participated, a big thank you to you too. So go ahead and make sure to tag us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and let us know what are your thoughts from today's show. What resonated with you? We would love to hear what you would like us to cover in our next episode. If you see that some of your friends would see value in what you saw today, please share the series with them. Who knows? Maybe you could inspire them to building trust. Till then, thank you for tuning into Trust Talks, brought to you by Renergetics Consulting, where we transform people, transform business. Take care, folks.